Okay, so welcome back, everyone, and people who are watching later, welcome as well. I'm going to start standing this time, and we're going to explore some movements that are Tai Chi movements or Tai Chi steps that will maybe challenge our balance, but they'll also help us maybe understand some things about our balance in relation to our prosthetic limb, if we're lower limb prosthetic wearers, and that could be bilateral as well as unilateral, and also different levels of amputation as well. All of these factors are important considerations. So I'm going to stand up. Some people may be seated, but similar things apply here in terms of weight shift from one hip to another, things like that. So I don't want you to feel you're missing out if you are sat down. We'll be including hand and arm movements in these explorations as well. So I'll start standing and then I'll sit down to demonstrate as well. So we'll use a movement called Part the Wild Horse's Mane to explore some of these ideas and concepts. So let's just start off seated or standing and just kind of try and have the sense that you grow up from your seat or grow up from your feet. And that includes us with prosthetic limbs. We're growing up from the ground up, seated or standing. So instead of being told to stand up straight, just try and be nice and relaxed and just have a sense of your body and it being grounded on the earth, which is a much bigger body if you think about it. Okay, this is an important point. And then whether you're seated or standing, we're just going to shift weight from one hip or one leg to the other, just like that. Might sound terribly simple to do this, but actually it's a very fundamental part of what we want to understand from Tai Chi. Weight shift, what that feels like seated. You know, when you're in a car, you go around a corner, weight shifts from one side to the other. And if we're not stable enough in our torso, that can actually be quite challenging. And if we're standing, if we're on a train, on a bus maybe, for instance, that's moving, that in itself is challenging. So let's just do this exploration of weight shift. We turn it into a bit of a moving meditation, so to speak. Feel joints. Start with the hips. Any of you have done yoga where you do a bit of a body scan, you kind of work up or down the body, don't you? So think about your hips. You can put your hands on the bony bits of your hips and you might be able to feel them moving. And that might give you a greater sense of how pressure loads through the legs. And then again, depending on amputation levels and whether you're bilateral or unilateral, you've got to find sensation within the socket that gives you feedback. And I'm hoping that's not painful feedback. Again, having a comfortable socket is so important in respect to this ability, particularly if we start standing up and being able to be comfortable standing up. So let's just come to a rest. In fact, standing up tends to be actually a rather challenging posture to maintain versus moving in some respects. I certainly find standing more difficult than moving sometimes. So we're going to move our hips in circles this time. We're going to place our hands on our hips if you wish. Again, if you're sat down, I want you to move your torso in a circle around your seat. Again, because this is about muscles that support the torso. So whether we're seated or standing, we're creating a circle. Small circles, because again, we're using this as a little mindful meditation. We're exploring sensation, sensation in the hips and pelvis, sensation in the torso. See, I've got a painful lower back in the left side that suddenly has revealed itself simply as a consequence of doing this movement. So again, I'm not judging. I'm not thinking about, oh, I don't like that sensation. I'm just taking notice. I'm paying attention. What's going on there? Why is my back hurting? Asking questions, being inquisitive. And now I'm going to circle the other way. Again, if you sat down, circle the head and torso in different directions. And again, just get a feel for what that's like in your seat. Is one side easier to move on to than the other, say? And that applies to standing. Lovely. Okay. So let's just come to a rest and we'll hold a beach ball. Okay. And we'll just do part the earth from the sky just to kind of shift our attention for a moment into a different way by moving into this pressing movement. And bring the hands back together. I'll turn to the side just so you can see bottom hand coming up over the top and press. So that's the movement, part the earth from the sky. And we can breathe with that movement if we wish, breathing in and then breathing out as we go for that press. And then maybe breathing in as we come back together, ready to maybe breathe out as we press again. But don't force the breath. If it just doesn't quite fit with you and how you feel today, just focus on the movement. But okay, let's bring this movement back to where we started in terms of how does this movement affect our balance? If you're standing up, you probably will notice that your pelvis and weight is shifting somewhat as you lift a hand and arm overhead. If you're seated, you'll probably notice a weight shift in your seat as well. Again, we don't tend to notice these things, but actually that's what Tai Chi is in a large part about, helping us be aware of what happens when we move. And if we practice and investigate and explore these ideas and sensations, they become part of our day-to-day life. We become a bit more mindful of ourselves when we're moving around. And that can help in day-to-day life. So we're just using a single movement, part the earth from the sky, to explore how that impacts our posture. Let's do one more. Wonderful. Okay. So maybe more particularly for people who are standing, we've been stood in place. So if you can, do some weight shift, maybe try and take some weight off one foot and the other. If you sat down, do that thing that you move around in your seat, like being on a long car journey and you get very achy and you have to move around. Just move around and just kind of relieve pressure. Pressure builds up in the socket, in the stump or the residual limb or limbs. And again, we have to move to relieve pressure and allow blood to re-infuse and get into different parts of the tissues. So again, all of this is helping us understand what our needs are at this particular time. Okay, holding that ball again. And this time, whichever hand is on top, I've got my left hand on top if you do want to be in sync with me. I'm shifting my hands off to the left because that's the left hand. My weight has to go that way, so I'm aware of that. I turn the ball over, right hand on top, and I carry it across to the right. And once again, I'm aware of my weight moving, and that will apply As well, for people who are seated, you'll be aware of your weight shifting. And again, it's important because if you think about it, you're probably unaware of this happening. Say, for instance, when you pick a kettle up to fill up a cup, we tend to just engage in tasks and we're not necessarily always aware of how it's impacting our balance, unless maybe we start to lose our balance. And then all of a sudden we're very aware that whatever we were doing put us out of balance momentarily. So just explore that movement, turning the ball and realizing that the weight of the hands and arms is enough for us to have to shift some weight to accommodate that movement. And once again, we'll come back. And once again, we'll just have a little movement break, stepping if necessary, moving around in our seat if necessary, just to relieve pressure. Again, important things to realize that we need to do this. And it's an important consideration for various other things like being at work and actually needing to move maybe more regularly than other people, just because it gets onerous for us. Okay, so part the wild horse's mane, seated or standing. I've got my right hand on top. So again, if you want to mirror, please do. Right hand on top. I'm pulling my right hand back and I'm sliding my left hand forward. And I find a table, an imaginary table in this case, with my right hand. And this left hand has just floated out in front of my shoulder, like so. And then I turn the hands over. The hands have swapped places. This is my left hand now on top. And I pull that one back and slide the right hand forward. And then turn them over. And we're back to where we started, right hand on top. That's the movement. Alternately sliding my hands past one another, one hand finding a table, the other hand kind of floating out there in front of their respective shoulder. But once again, seated or standing, just be aware of how much you have to adjust through the pelvis, through the torso, to accommodate the shift of weight of one hand being out here and another hand being down there. That's a very Ron Seal description, but that's exactly what's happened. We've got a very heavy thing now out in space in front of us called an arm. And it requires a certain amount of adjustment, seated or standing. Okay? Lovely. Let's come back. And again, a little bit of a movement break. So for the next bit, I'm going to sit down, but again, it applies to those of us who remain standing up. We're going to move a foot forward, okay? So in this case, it's the right foot, okay? So in this case, it's the right foot. If I'm seated, I'm just pushing it forward. This is my prosthetic. If I'm standing, I'll just stand quickly. I'm just pushing it forward a bit, okay? Just a bit. And I've got my left hand on top, okay? Left hand on top holding the ball. I do part the wild horse's mane. And just see how that feels, having that right foot in front. Does it act as a stabilizer? Or actually, does it mean that you're off balance? We come back and we've now got the opposite hand on top. This is my right hand on top. I'm going to bring my right foot in. I'm going to push. This is my intact leg, the left leg forward. You might want to do the same with your left leg, whether it's intact or not. And then, once again, pull and push the hands into their respective positions, right hand down, left hand out. And we're alternating, we're picking up a leg, bringing it back, changing hand position, pushing a leg forward, right leg again, right hand going out, and moving into this stance called part the wild horse's mane. Take your time, don't worry about it being a bit clunky. Moving slowly like this is a challenge in itself. And if you need to sit down and rest and pause, please do so as well, because again, we're kind of challenging ourselves a little bit or quite a lot through this movement, like so. Okay, let's just have a little pause and a rest. I'll stand up and illustrate that standing. So for me, as I've found out, it's easier, strangely for me, to go onto my prosthetic side than it is to go on my intact side. So when I do this movement and move my right leg forward, I can support myself on that side. I'm lucky. I've got a knee. I've got injuries in that leg, but I've got a knee, so it helps. If you've not got a knee, I know that's much more difficult. And then as I come back and transfer weight and go to the other side, here's my problem. I've got to bear weight onto this prosthetic limb to get my intact leg out. Ouch, that hurt a bit, but there we go. So for me, it's a reminder that being able to support myself momentarily on my prosthetic limb is tricky. And you might be saying to yourself, come on, Phil, you're telling us stuff that we know already very well. But certainly from a Tai Chi point of view, from a sort of Chinese point of view, from a Kung Fu point of view, this helps us then think about, okay, so I'm not as steady on one side, for instance, versus the other. So if it was my Tai Chi teacher back in the day, he'd say, so you need to work harder on that side that's weaker, or do a bit more on that side that's weaker, or preference that side that is weaker, which is maybe at odds sometimes with other kinds of messages that we get. There's a sense of, if there's a sense of scope for development in an area of movement, we purposefully explore that scope, that range. So for example, in day-to-day life, if I'm carrying a bag, any kind of bag, shopping bag, kind of satchel if I'm at work, compost bags, anything, I carry it in the opposite side to my prosthetic side, because that loads the prosthetic leg more than the intact. So again, if you are a bilateral amputee, below knee or above knee, it's kind of academic in respect of that thing. But for me, I know that in order to keep improving my balance on this prosthetic, I've actually got to load it, even though there's times when I would prefer not to. And I'm not saying move into pain, that's not what I'm saying, but it's actually doing sometimes the more challenging aspect that helps me then be able to move more fluently in day-to-day life. So I hope this initial bit of the session helps us understand that Tai Chi is very much an investigation, a chance to be curious about what's going on. Let's change tack a little bit, seated or standing, and let's do the first movement, opening movement of the Shibashi part 2 set where we open out and let the hands fall. And if we can, we drop a little bit into the legs if we can. If you're seated, you can lean forwards and then come upright. But again, just be aware of, again, weight and mass and how we have to organize ourselves around a base of support, either created by our legs standing up or created by our seat, whatever kind of seat that is, and our legs to a certain extent as we do this. Lovely. And then if we build rotation in, that adds another plane that makes life a little bit more challenging. So if we do wise owl, turning to the right and left and lifting hands and arms, again, just take notice of how that impacts your balance. So I'm turning to the right, I'm having to organize my body to facilitate that movement as I come back. And then if I turn to the left, much more difficult. For me, at least. If I turn to the right, it goes easier. So again, find out, okay, is there a side that goes easier for me? Is it left or right? It might be relatively equal. Again, it might be. Generally, we find that there's some asymmetry in terms of how easily a movement flows from one side to the other. And again, Tai Chi is about balance and harmony. And again, balance and harmony at a very grounded level to start off with as we explore that rotation and lift. Wise out. And if we do another movement called sway the head, now we're going to challenge ourselves quite significantly. Again, whether we're seated or standing. So just be aware of this. If at all possible, if you're standing, try to take a bit of a wider stance, i.e. a bigger base of support, a broader base of support. If you are seated, again, you want to have a sense that you have a good base of support in your seat. I'm placing my hands on my hips. Again, standing up. You might be able to do this in your chair if you've haven't got too close at armrest on either side. And I'm turning to the right, and then I'm just going to dip my head and torso down and round to the left as if dipping under a rope and picking myself up again to come upright again. Okay? And then I'm turning to the left and I'm dipping back under that rope and coming back up again. And the first thing I find with my body is my right hip's not happy today. I got some complaints. Okay. So again, that tells me, okay, things are feeling a bit sketchy. So I'm not going to force things. I'm just going to work comfortably within that range. I'm going to try to be as relaxed and as comfortable as I can within the range that I've got, which is different from, say, last week where I had more range. Again, another principle of Tai Chi is that we meet ourselves every day as if for the first time, okay? Just because we found things easy one day doesn't mean it's going to be that easy on another day in the future. So again, we have to be kind to ourselves, compassionate, realize that life is ups and downs, and sometimes we have good days and good weeks, And other times we have pretty shonky days and not so good weeks. So just explore that movement. And if you're kind and compassionate and prepared to just be gentle with yourself, you might find that the range of motion just gets a little better all by itself, simply because you're not pushing things. You're prepared to look after yourself, look after your balance as we go. So let's go one more time. Don't worry if we've ended up out of sync. And come back upright. So that's a challenge. We're moving now, instead of just hands and arms, we're moving the bigger mass of our torso, shoulder girdle, neck and head in a big sweeping arc. And again, that's a challenge. That's a challenge to stay upright, even in a chair, as well as standing up. Let's return to another movement that involves a big sweep of the arms from one side to the other. It's called Fisherman Casts His Net, okay? And let's see if we can have your right hand kind of up around head height. Palm is facing outwards. And then your left hand is down below, palm facing forwards again, like so. I want you to imagine that you're holding a net and that you are casting it to your right, and you turn all the way as far as you can. And when you turn the hands over, the left hand comes on top, bottom hand is now the right hand, and you sweep that net over and around to the left. Turn the hands over and a big sweep back to the right side. Turn the hands over, left hand on top, turn to the left. And we just alternate from one side to the other. And we're imagining that we're casting a net from one side, and then we cast another net to the other side, or it could be the same net. And we're turning the head with the movement, like so. It's a big movement. Again, seated or standing, it's going to challenge our awareness of ourself in time and space. Okay, last one. Going to go to one side. Don't worry if we're out of sync. Come back to the center and let those hands melt away. So, we've explored balance in relation to our base of support, seated or standing, and that by going slowly, we have this opportunity to be aware of what's going on for us at that point in time, and that can be helpful. Research tends to point to the fact that by going slowly and being aware of what's happening to ourselves as we move actually helps us build neural pathways that facilitate greater awareness of ourselves in time and space. And that's important because if we live with chronic pain, as many of us do, that actually disrupts our perceptions of ourselves in time and space, and then how we move in time and space. But by moving slowly, we can begin to alter those pathways in the brain and perhaps begin to help manage chronic pain in a slightly different way. Not necessarily always to get rid of it, but it might help us manage it. So let's just bring things to a close. We're linking our thumbs together and we're just bringing both hands to rest on our lower abdomen, the lower part of the tummy or belly, just like so. I want to just take a purposeful breath and almost have a sigh as you let that first breath go. You might want to repeat that purposeful breath. And then you might just want to okay, I'm just going to let my breath do its thing and just be quiet for a few more seconds. Just breathing. It's okay to close your eyes if you wish. And then we just take our hands apart. That's our cue to say that we've finished our current exploration. And I will bring my box back and sit down, stop the recording. And if anyone wants to ask any questions or make any comments,